Welcome everyone to the session. For those who don't know me, my name is Brandon Riskowski. I'm one of the co-founders of Safety Nights. And for those not aware of the platform, we're actually one of the only free social medias made by and for safety professionals. So if you haven't checked it out yet, go to safetynights.com and give a register there. But welcome to the Heat Summit. And I'm here to introduce Cameron Johnson. So welcome, Cameron. He's been a long time EHS professional in the field, specializing in manufacturing and general EHS consulting. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about me or Safety Nights at this point. You guys are here for the session, so I'm going to turn it over to Cameron.
Thank you. Yeah, excited to be here. If we want to throw the PowerPoint up, I've kind of got a little intro in the very beginning there where I can kind of go over a little bit about who I am, what I do, so that you guys have a little bit of a background of myself. So can everybody see the PowerPoint? This is the first time I'm using this this program, and I'm not always the greatest with technology. So, all right. Yeah, here we go. So, all right, guys. So this is heat illness and manufacturing. So some of you guys just followed up with Drew Hinton. Drew is obviously a substantial, professional in the field of EHS. And honestly, I don't exactly know how you follow up a session like that. He's so intelligent with regulations and training. He's a part of Aero Safety. So if you need any consulting or things like that, go check out Aero Safety. Drew is phenomenal at what he does. So a little bit about today. We're going to go over some brief introduction of who I am. I'm going to go over a little bit of what heat illness is, some of the challenging in manufacturing, some of the technology that I use and I'm familiar with, that both on a preventative and proactive side, as well as from some of the emergency necessities. And then really more importantly, and what's dear to my heart, is how do we make the pitch to senior leadership to really get them to buy in that we need, $1 million a year in health and safety, even though they want to give us $1 a year. So to dive in, again, my name is Cameron Johnson. I spent over a decade in EHS and risk management. I really began my career in forensic interviewing and diving into the forensic interview side of root cause analysis and going all over the United States and helping do forensic interviews for everything from employee theft to, fatality incidences. And it really got me started in man, I'd really like to be on the other side of that. So I've been able to spend a long time in there. The last 7 years, I've really focused on how do we develop EHS professionals to have strategic opinions in businesses, and how do we get EHS professionals to have a seat at the table when it comes to making strategic plans and initiatives within a company. And I get to, again, travel all over for that. And there's actually a couple people on here that, so they'll hear a lot of the same today that they hear whenever I go travel with them. But it's a little bit about me. So what is heat illness? So everyone has a rough idea, especially if you just came from Drew's session, right? Heat illness itself is essentially a spectrum of disorders due to increased body temperature. And one of the things that I will notate is that heat illness can start at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit core body temperature. This is not something that somebody has to have a 103 degree core body temperature to really start seeing effects. At 98.6 degree, it really will start the initiation of heat illness, which is heat rash and or heat cramps. So it's something that can occur even at not the most extreme temperatures. So what are some causes to heat illness, right? So some of the causes are exposure to high temperatures, especially with high humidity, strenuous physical activity, dehydration, age, alcohol consumption, electrolyte imbalance, and then some diseases such as cystic fibrosis, butchered that word. And really what that is the inability, right, to sweat and allow our body to cool down. So I'm going to ask a question. So outside of these, is there anything else that anyone has that they believe can lead or is something that assists in causing heat illness? So give a second if somebody wants to put some things in the chat. Is there anything outside of this list that can help cause heat illness? That's all right. We'll move on. So there are actually a lot of things. So those are some big ones. But really, this chart is a huge proponent to what heat-related illnesses can be caused by. And in manufacturing, which I'll go into, there's a lot of things that people don't necessarily play a factor, right? So if you look on here, right, there's radiant heat sources, right? Are your machines radiating heat through your facility? You have PPE and clothing in manufacturing, especially in manufacturing that I do currently. We deal with molten lead, molten copper. We deal with extrusion machines that have 700 to 900 degree heat and steam. So there's a lot of aspects that play into that, right? Lack of recent exposure is huge. In my time traveling across the U.S., one of the leading indicators for someone to have heat illness, especially when it comes to a fatality, is that they haven't been exposed to it before. Advanced age, right? Pregnancy, medications. The big thing that I can tell everybody, because there's so many things that play into heat illness, is knowing your team is substantial, right? If you're an EHS professional and you're operating in a sense that you are in your office or you're on a job site and you're in a job trailer for 80% of your time, especially through the summer, you're not assisting your proactive nature of preventing heat illness related syndromes. So get to know your team. Right? I'm not saying go ask them, hey, John Doe, tell me every medication you're on, right? But the more we get to know our team, the more that we understand some of the nuances that they have, some of the things they have going on in their life that really can play a factor in whether or not they have heat related potential symptoms. So I'll tell you this. So whenever I was in college, I was 21 years old. I decided that for the first time I was going to move out of my dorm and I was going to move to an apartment complex. And I come from the South in a farming community. And I was always raised that no matter what, you pull up your skirt and you get things done. So when I decided I was going to move into this apartment complex, the guy building the apartment complex said, hey, we've got some extra work. If you don't want to go home for the summer, come help me. We're going to put in French drains for all of these apartment complexes, and I could use another guy to help dig. And I said, great. Sounds, as a college kid, sounds like beer money. Sounds good to me. Let's make it happen. So I stayed over the summer to help dig trenches and to move gravel and move rock, put it in wheelbarrows, take it 30, 40 yards to the dumpster or to whichever truck that we were loading material in after we pulled it from the grounds. And I'll tell you, in that moment at 21 years old, whenever I decided, wow, I'm dizzy, I started getting weakness. I started having problems in my mind. It was tough it up, be a man, get your stuff together. But the reality is, looking back on that, it could have got really bad really fast. And a lot of the times we just don't play a factor. So even some of these young kids that come out and they come to your job sites and they're trying to tough it up because maybe it's their first big boy job, or maybe it's their first job that, really they're making a decent amount of money. Some of them they're going to hide their symptoms. So get to know your team, get out there, talk to them. All right. So one of the things that we look at for symptoms of heat-related illness, right? So it kind of starts as heat cramps or a heat rash, right? If you start seeing your employees with flushed skin, you start seeing that they have, or they're talking about they are having cramps or things like that, right? We've got to move them to a cool place. We've got to get them cooled down. And we need to get them electrolytes. One of the big things in manufacturing for us is I could probably go out to one of my manufacturing facilities and I'll see half the team drinking Red Bulls or drinking Monsters or energy drinks and things like that. That's not replenishing what they need. That's the opposite of what they need. So make sure in that moment that your guys are drinking water. And if they start experiencing, flushed skin, or they're getting cramps in their legs or things of that nature, replace that Red Bull, replace that Monster with water, electrolytes, Gatorades. Some people have, should we have sugar or not? Sugar is fine. It's one of the electrolytes that you can replenish with sodium. So if we start getting past that, we go to heat exhaustion, right? So heat exhaustion, you start going to get the opposite. You're no longer red skin. You're going to get potentially pale, right? You're going to have some nausea and vomiting like I did whenever I was in college my senior year. I started getting nauseous. I started getting some headaches and weakness, right? In those situations, you're now on a borderline of whether or not you really can control the direction of where this illness goes. It can change very quickly, very fast. So definitely get them to a cool place. Remove any excess clothes. In manufacturing, which we'll go over in a few slides, there's potential for us to wear substantial clothes. When you're dealing with molten lead, you're wearing an entire, or molten steel or molten copper, you're wearing an entire molten suit. remove the extra PPE that's not needed, get them to a cold place. And I will say this, if they're not improving, put on a cold vest, right? And I'll go over what a cold vest is, but it's something that is life saving. So I actually, cold vest will be presenting on this as well. I know firsthand cold vest can save lives. And unfortunately, you see it all the time, whether it's in occupational or it's in schools, high school, things of that nature, where athletes pass away from heat illness because the signs are caught too late and they don't have any emergency equipment on hand to help control the heat illness before it leads to being something fatal. So heat stroke, you're automatically calling 911. You're, again, apply a cold vest if you haven't already. Put as much cool items on them as possible. The reality is that they're going to have a super rapid heart rate. They're going to have headaches. They're going to have confusion. They may be agitated, right? I know that I work with a whole bunch of guys who are agitated all the time as it is. So that's why knowing your team is super important, right? Again, like I said, I'm not going to dive into a whole bunch of this stuff right off the top. I'm going to focus on some manufacturing things, but download these spreadsheets, download these PowerPoints, go back to Drew's, download those, really dive into what symptoms and what you can do from a first aid perspective on preventing this heat illness. It is something that can change very quickly. And in manufacturing, it can change on the drop of a dime. So really, right. So OSHA doesn't currently have any regulations. They use they use their general duty clause, but they do have something proposed, which again, Drew Hinton went over. It's based on NIOSH's recommendations. But if you do live in California, Washington, Oregon, Minnesota, or Colorado, there are state standards that are out there. So if you live in one of those 5 states, definitely dive into your state standard. And this base is the new proposal. If you're in Drew's session, he went over this. Essentially, based on NIOSH's recommendations, there'll be an initial heat trigger at 80 degrees. So when it's 80 degrees is whenever you'll have to really kickstart your initial emergency action plan for heat exposure, which will implement measures to manage indoor temperatures, to help returning crews really acclimate to the weather, which again, as I said before, is typically one of the leading indicators that I see with either new people coming into manufacturing or into another workforce that causes heat illness, is they're just not used to being in the heat. Ensure that PPE is suitable for hot conditions. I starred that. The reality is that in manufacturing, it's really easy for companies to say, this is the PPE I'm requiring you to wear. You need to wear it all the time because that's what's expected. But is it really, right? Have we done our due diligence in diving into a proper PPE assessment and analysis and identifying what is needed through the various times of the year? As times change, so do needs of PPE, right? So then at 90 degrees, there'll be a high heat trigger, right? So there'll be 15-minute breaks every 2 hours. Your lunch can be included in that 15 minutes. You'll monitor employees for heat symptoms, such as buddy systems. Supervisors, they can't check on more than 20 people at a time. And honestly, in manufacturing, our expectations, they check on way less than that. I'd like to see that around 10 people. And that you have to alert anytime ambient temperatures get above 120 degrees regular. In manufacturing, that's in what I do, that's all the time. We have indoor temperatures above 120 in the summer. We have to notify our employees. And here at Kalis and even at Caddy OHS, when we go to places and we check out manufacturing facilities, we make sure that they have some form of broadcast system, text alert system, or some form of internal communication system that lets the employees know what the day is going to look like for them. A lot of times we'll include that in toolbox talks, right? The pre-meetings prior to machines getting turned on. At Kalis, no machine can get turned on until they are cleared to do so by a supervisor or a member of management. So we use those as times as also to tell them about what the potential hazards are for the day, and those hazards include heat. So like I said, so challenges in manufacturing is really high heat or high temp work environments, humidity levels, radiant heat sources, ventilation. I don't know how many of you all that are on this call today are in manufacturing, but manufacturing in most of the U.S. is known to not have the best ventilation. They don't have the best airflow. Machines are big, bulky. They block airflow, the minimum amount of airflow that you do have, right? So PPE and protective clothing, hydration, and emergency action plans. So one of the challenges with manufacturing, when I mention hydration, is if you are dealing with molten lead, water and molten lead are a combination of absolute disaster, right? Small amounts of water, when it touches a pot of molten lead, can lead to substantial eruptions and huge splatters. And our molten lead runs between 700 degrees and 1,000 degrees at any given time. So how do you properly, and we'll go into this, but how do you properly make sure that your team is hydrated, knowing that they can't have water anywhere near their workstations, right? Those challenges in manufacturing are so unique, because in distribution centers or in other locations, you don't necessarily have to worry about substantial ambient temperatures or radiant temperatures of machinery and things like that. So is anybody here, I guess, from a conversational standpoint, as I dive into, like I said, I was going to briefly cover some of the heat illness stuff, but as I dive into manufacturing and dive into some of the technology, is there anyone that's currently in this room that works in manufacturing right now? And if you do work in manufacturing and you don't mind sharing, what type of manufacturing do you work in? See if something jumps in. So prior to jumping into this next slide, as I mentioned before, one of the things, filament wound structure poles. Yeah, absolutely. So depending on if you're producing your own filament or you are procuring it, yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I see a lot when I go into manufacturing facilities and we're focused on building out strategic plans is that they, in the summertime, we take core temperatures of our building from either a singular location or maybe a few locations, but they're not necessarily strategic place. So I'm going to show you, this is a heat map of a location that was okay with me sharing. Yeah, absolutely. So you deal with super high ovens and heat processes, Oakley. Absolutely. So this will be super relevant to you, Oakley, is depending on the locations in your facilities. If you've never done a heat mapping survey or you've never had someone come in and heat map your facility, so this is a great example right here, and Oakley is going to play into you, perfectly. Is that orange or that brown box is the supervisor's office. You can kind of see from the temperatures in this facility, it's air conditioned. It looks good. The triangle that's just below that orange box is the thermometer that is reading the heat in the entire facility. So when we talk about 80 degrees or 90-degree thresholds, that identifies what trigger that we are putting in effect for heat illness, is that triangle really taking the appropriate measure to identify what the heat sources are in that facility? Absolutely not. And unfortunately, a lot of facilities fall into this, and it's not ill-intended. They're not. I purposely am not taking proper thermometer readings, but doing a heat mapping and a part of either a PPE assessment or a JSA or a JHA is that heat mapping kind of gets lost. It's really talked about one time a year in the summertime, and there's not a whole lot of due diligence put into it unless you have an engineering team that has an approval process to identify potential hazards prior to either modifying or bringing in equipment. But I just want to show you guys, with this facility, with the supervisors are reading from that triangle. Loading. Sorry, guys, I'm reading some comments coming through. So loading is closing. 110 plus degree for the majority of the year. That is not a place that I feel like I would want to work, Oakley, but that's, it's substantial. So when you look at your oven and curing process from inside your facility, and then you look at going outside to loading those poles into 100-degree heat, one of the things that should be taken into consideration is the mitigation of changes in body temperature. So you can't really look at the ability to ultra cool an inside facility to then go outside. One of the absolute hazards, and unfortunately I've seen it, numerous times, is a facility that does a really, really good job at keeping their indoor temperature cool, and they keep it at 60, 70 degrees, and then you do deliveries outside, or you have guys going in and outside on forklifts, or the loading team or receiving team, and they then are going from 110 to 70 to 110 to 70. One of the things that you'll have to look into is actually hyperthermia. Hyperthermia can occur at temperatures that are not freezing. When your body is going from a high heat to a low heat, and your body has a change in core temperature that drops, that's something that you'll have to take into consideration. So you almost have to have your facility be a little warmer than you want it to be to mitigate that moving forward. But one thing that we can look into in this heat mapping is that in those super dark red areas, should we have identified SEGs, right? Identified similar exposure groups? Absolutely. So when we're building out emergency action plan in manufacturing, and we have radiant heat sources, and we have, whether it be ovens where Oakley is, or for us, it's extrusion machines and, molten copper or lead pots, flow pots and things of that nature. So we should really be isolating those individual people, or the people who work in those job classifications, and they really will have to have a different emergency action plan, a different heat threshold plan than the rest of the facility, because they're exposed at temperatures that are different than everyone else. And when you're building out your emergency action plan and you're identifying your SDGs or your similar exposure groups, really take those into consideration. Make sure that we're not just saying, okay, at ABC company, company wide, anything that's over 80 degrees, we take the first threshold in consideration. That 80 degrees is, especially if you look at this map, some of those really large areas of concentration are absolutely going to be a different 80 degrees. They may hit 80 degrees as soon as that pot turns on. They may hit 80 degrees, as soon as, the pot is done with its first batch or its first flow. So make sure that when you're building your emergency action plans, you're building your heat illness prevention plans, that you're taking into consideration the radiant heat in your facility, and also the employees that are working in different exposure groups. A maintenance technician versus someone who is working in an oven all day, they're not exposed the same. And that's something I see that gets left out on a regular basis. And the probability of the person that's working in those high heat areas versus someone that's sitting in an office in the supervisor's office is, they're exposed at such a high, a different standard. So one thing that I like to look at, and this is something that I show a lot of both my clients, but then also all of my manufacturing facilities, is the NOAA's National Weather Services Heat Index. So this is a really good for those who have senior leaders, or those who have people who are like, man, 80 degrees is not that serious, or, I've worked in 90 degrees my entire life. It's not really that bad. But this is a great example to show where, based on temperature and humidity, we have a clear, understandable chart that most people could look at and say, okay, well, if it is 82 degrees outside and we have, 75, relative humidity, or we have 100 relative humidity, all of those things play a factor in what the potential for long-term exposure or strenuous activity is. And by long-term exposure and strenuous activity, we have to take in manufacturing, we have to take these temperatures and the relative humidity, and then we have to add in our radiant temperatures. We have to add in all of our machines. We have to add in everything that plays in a factor, not just this. So in manufacturing, even at the lowest level, if it's 40% relative humidity and 80 degrees outside, so you have a base 80 degree threshold there on likelihood of a heat disorder. If I put them next to one of my ovens that, or not ovens, Oakley's ovens, if I put them next to one of Oakley's ovens, there's a high probability that changes drastically, right? So in our extrusion machines, where the steam is between around 700 degrees, or our melting pots, or molten lead pots are, up to 1,000 degrees, there's a high probability that that person is going to be somewhere in the orange instead of in caution. But I like this chart. It's something that as EHS professionals or as safety professionals, if you're having to explain to supervisors why low temperatures but high humidity is an issue or a problem, this typically is a pretty good chart that I've never had anyone really push back a whole lot. It's pretty clear in understanding that based on temperature and humidity levels, really changes the likelihood of a heat disorder from happening. So one thing I have on here is I hear people all the time say 80 degrees is not that hot, right? I've worked in 80 degrees my whole life and I've never had any problems. But if we revert back and we look at the potential signs and what can cause heat illness and all of the different personal medical reasons and all the different aspects, PPE, radiant heat, medications, pregnancy, things like that, don't fall into that air trap, right? Don't fall into the air trap of, it's really not that bad. It may not be that bad for you, but it doesn't mean that the person right next to you isn't on medication or isn't have some form of personal medical that it could be life threatening for. So do not fall into that air trap. So heat illness prevention, right? So obviously we want to drink plenty of fluids, stay away from alcohol, caffeine, and soda. Water should be portable and accessible. Wear light colored clothes, lightweight clothes that are loose fitting. And I'll tell you, in manufacturing, wearing loose fitting clothes can be very difficult. You can machine guard until you are blue in the face, but having loose fitting clothes, all it takes is one minor incident and that person is now in a really bad situation because their clothes got caught on a piece of machinery. So you have to choose loose fitting clothes that are appropriate for the hazards that are presented at your environment. If there's flames, if there's heat, if, like I mentioned before, with molten lead or molten copper, if you have steam, things like that, really make sure that the clothes, when you do your PPE assessments and you're analyzing your JSAs, that you're really diving into what is the best loose fitting clothes for my job classification. And again, there's going to be different exposure groups where I might be able to wear this jacket and a long sleeve in one job class. I may not be able to do this in another job class. So, make sure that when you're analyzing your JSAs, you're doing your PPE assessments, which I typically includes clothes in my PPE assessments, that you're doing those based on different exposure groups, not company wide in manufacturing. I have not met a manufacturing company yet that doesn't have at least 2, 3, 4 different exposure groups. Train your team, right? Supervisors should be trained to really understand what the acclimatization is and how to bring on a new hire appropriately. They should understand that. They need to know the nuance. They need to know the why. And that goes for everything in EHS, right? If we tell a supervisor, do this because I said so, it's way different than I say, hey, I need you to do this. Here's exactly why. Here's the importance of it, and I'm going to give you all of this information so that then you can explain it to somebody else. The supervisors need to understand how to monitor weather reports, and they need to be able to respond to hot weather advisories. There are a lot of apps out there. There's a lot of programs out there. NIOSH has their own app. There's an app called Heat Safety. I think I have 3 or 4 different weather apps on my phone. But the reality is, I don't need to be the only person that knows how to monitor weather. I don't need to be the only person who knows how to respond if there's a hot weather advisory that's out. We need to make sure that at the base level, our supervisors and our leads, our foremen, whoever it may be, understands the nuance of a weather report and knows your guys' emergency action plan, knows your guys' heat illness prevention plan, and how to implement it. Because if I'm not available, I do not want someone to have a heat illness, especially a fatal heat illness, because they're waiting for me to reply. And I see that often, right, where EHS professionals are like, "I want to be to say, come to me," and I think that's great in a lot of aspects. But the direction that we should look at is empowering our supervisors, empowering our leads, our assistant supervisors, empowering other members of management to be able to make decisions and make quality decisions based on the information we give. We can turn them into experts in those fields as we act as consultants in our roles and not necessarily just the direct manager to influence everything. And then one thing about the supervisors is monitoring, encouraging adequate fluid intake and rest breaks. I come into manufacturing where we get I'll tell you guys this: the average tenure at the company I work at is 17 years, right? So I have a lot of tenure guys, a lot of guys. We have plenty of guys here that have been here over 40 years, and plenty that have been here over 30. And some of the times when you're dealing with people who've been at a company or highly tenured, they've been here a long time, getting them to drink fluids, getting them to take extra breaks, and getting them to do things like that isn't always the easiest thing. But if you encourage your supervisors and you encourage your team to constantly be walking around the facility, talking to the team and encouraging it and getting buy-in. And from my experience, all it really takes is getting buy-in from two, three, four, maybe even one, depending on the influence they have and those senior level or those tenured guys. And that really can help them get everybody else on board to doing it. It's not seen as, something safety just wants us to do, but it's seen as something that the people, some of the entry level guys, or maybe the guys who haven't been there as long, look up to. Okay, well, if John's doing it, then it must be important, so I'm going to do it too. So obviously, based on the NIOSH, just acclimatization for your team, which again, if you're on Drew's, he did a great job going over all of this. But essentially, there's a 7 to 14 day period. Your goal is to acclimatize no more than 20% per day. You do have some options there as far as bringing in your high heat standard instead of a full acclimatization over 7 to 14 days. But regardless, dive in, understand how you're going to bring on a new hire. How you're going to bring on a Cameron when he's 21 years old and always really looking at the paycheck, and he's telling himself, no matter how bad this sucks, suck it up. Just get the job done, keep moving forward. How are you guys going to address some of those people as they come onto your team? And how are you going to get them to not want to just jump in, dive in, and run full charge since day one? All right. So does anybody have any questions real quick before I dive into some of the other aspects of manufacturing, going into some of the technology and some of the ways that we can influence senior leadership? I just want to make sure, kind of base touch everything here, but going to dive a little deeper here in just a second in some of these things. All right, move forward then. So one of the things that I look at is proactive versus reactive safety. And obviously, I'm sure everyone on this call agrees that our goal is to be proactive. And in a perfect world, I appreciate that, Ron. So in a perfect world, we would say there's no one's ever going to have the illness, no one's ever going to have problems. And I'm a proponent and a big believer in bringing realistic solutions to sites. And I could pitch a $75,000 tech on a job site that's going to make $100,000 total. It's not realistic. But to give you guys some examples of every site I go to, my current sites of all the manufacturing facilities that I have, I always roll out these items that you see on the screen here, right? Squincher powders that you can put into your 5-gallon jugs, Squincher popsicles, heating or cooling towels, and then if you're wearing hard hats or you're outside a lot, covers for the back of your neck, balaclavas, and or a cap that has some form of shade coolant. The Ergodyne cap that's in the bottom right corner, you can actually put water on. It'll soak into the cap, which creates kind of a cooling effect. The deal, if you're going to give somebody some form of coolant gear, though, is you have to make sure that it's kept up all the time. One of the things that I see often is I give an employee a cooling towel over the summer, and a month and a half in, the towel's beat to crap. It's not working its function anymore. But the company decided, hey, this was just a one-time thing. Make sure if you're giving these things out to your team that you're keeping up with them. And my goal when I budget, which I'll go over here in a bit, my goal when I budget and I'm making an argument or a pitch to senior leaders is I want to make sure that I have enough for my team through the whole summer. And I try to plan and coordinate how many I think the team's going to go through based on exposure groups by the end of the summer. It could be 1, it could be 5 per person. It really just depends on those exposure groups. From a reactive standpoint, one thing I like to add to our first aid kits in the top right is a heat stress kit. These are super basic. They're not fancy. You can make them yourselves, right? They typically include some form of a bottle of water, electrolyte packets, ice packs, things of that nature that allows you to just grab that, go to whoever you need to go to, bust out an ice pack, try to put it on their neck, try to get them to cool down, shake up a bottle of electrolytes, and really just, it's a handy kit. It's not the most amazing. It doesn't solve every problem, but it is, Squenchers takes too long to work. Jennifer, out of curiosity, how long do you think electrolytes, if you don't mind answering, how long do you believe it? Like how fast do you want something to work? There's actually a lot of options out there, and some options are very quick, like Tailwind. Tailwind's made for ultra runners, runners that are running, 100-mile, 200-mile races. They work very quick. Squencher, I use that as an example, and I do use it for my sites from a standpoint that it's typically pretty cost effective. I can get with one of my reps. Yeah, Tailwind's amazing, Andrew. To me personally, too, Tailwind's great if you have any form of stomach issues or you have a problem digesting some of the other things. Tailwind is very, very, very stomach friendly. They do have great flavors. The tangerine flavor is my favorite. I drink it all the time, and I get it in giant bags. I love Tailwind. So the thing I will say, Jennifer, on this note, is exactly what Oakley just said. Is we can't prepare for heat the day of, and honestly, it's really hard to catch up. If the night before I drink a 12-pack of Coors Light, and then I showed up to the job site and I'm like, give me those electrolytes, I need them, you're probably not catching up for the day. What we really need to make sure that we're doing, right, when we're having conversation with our team and we are, we're talking to them about the ability to mitigate the heat illness problems, is making sure that they are, drinking and they're, Jennifer, you are correct, and I'll address that in just a second. So that we're making sure that we're drinking and that we're hydrating before. As a EHS manager, one of the things that I like to do is I'm looking at the weather and I see, okay, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it's going to be in the high 70s, but Thursday it's supposed to break 80. So one thing I like to do then is create a toolbox talk, and I send it out to all the sites that says, hey, on Wednesday, I need you to, or Thursday, I need you guys to talk about this and go over what these expectations are, and just remind the team, make sure that you're staying hydrated. And it may seem really minor, but even if it can help one or two guys who are like, all right, they're reminding me, I'm going to go back, I'm going to drink some water and stay on top of it. But as far as drinking electrolytes or something and trying to get it to absorb faster than 20 minutes, Jennifer, really, the go-to there would be some form of glucose tablet, something that can be easily absorbed. I think that's an emergency situation, and really the Squenchers and the Squencher popsicles are really more of a proactive of the ability to get stuff to site and have them drink it over the course of a day, and not necessarily something that's an emergency situation that they need immediately. We'll go over some emergency stuff here in just a bit, but if I'm needing to get electrolytes in my system and I've got 20 minutes to absorb it, somewhere along the lines there's a gap that we didn't hit. So yes, there's definitely some additional emergency prep that I would take. Andrew says also never second ice gels. Yeah. The Never Second Ice gels are great too. There's some other gels out there as well, especially in the running community or the biking endurance community. Personally, I'm not a big fan of gels. It's hard for me to slurp down some of the gels, but they are great. And I don't think that these are one solution. Stick with it. It sounds like a lot of you guys have some options out there like Tailwind and some of the other things. The goal here is just to have something, not nothing, right? So if you have things you like, you have things your employee likes, this is really big when employee engagement comes. And I'll go into it later, but this doesn't have to be a safety thing. Whenever it comes to heat illness in my company, I don't push it out. All the items, I let HR do it, right? The more that I can do a multidisciplinary approach and I still get what I need for my team to be safe, I don't care who takes credit for it. I'll let HR take credit. If HR is bringing out, popsicles and they're handing them out to employees because it's hot outside, because they want to show appreciation, fantastic. In my mind, that's a win-win. My team gets what they need to be safe, and HR gets an employee appreciation out of it. So lastly, real fast, is just so we don't take too crazy long time, My family calls me the Bubba Gump of safety instead of shrimp because I can talk about it all day, every day, and not get tired. So I'll try to stay on track here a little bit. Cold vest we'll go into. Cold vest is amazing for emergency situations. And honestly, and Jennifer, if you need something in 20 minutes to get somebody taken care of as far as mitigating core body temperature and heat, it's going to be cold vest. It's one of the only solutions I've ever found if you're at a facility that does not have ice to be able to completely cover somebody in ice in just a few minutes. And it'll last hours. And I think the data is essentially that it can mitigate or lower someone's core body temperature 10 degrees within 30 minutes, which is absolutely life-saving. I know right now cold vest is really being used a lot in high school athletics because of its ability to really control body temperature quickly whenever you're in football and you're doing 2 days in the dog days of summer. So all right, so proactive emerging tech. So we'll kind of dive into this a little bit. So one of the things that I like to look into is I like to try to find solutions that are not just singular solutions. It doesn't just solve one of my problems. It solves a bunch of my problems, or it solves a problem and then gives me a bunch of extra that comes with it. So one thing in manufacturing is most manufacturing wears hard hats. And if you don't wear hard hats, you have other PPE. But to kind of touch on hard hats, so the majority of my teams wear hard hats, and the reality is there's a lot of different types of hard hats, different levels of hard hats, different classifications, CE, etc. But one thing that I want to talk to you guys about is the Stetson hard hats. Some of you guys probably have heard of Stetson, some maybe not as they emerge into the huge conglomerate of the hard hat world. But when we're doing JSAs and we're doing PPEs that need to stay up to date, it's not always easy to make sure that our employees have access to everything all the times. And even more important, at times it's tough to have first responders have access. So if you guys can see my screen, I actually have a Stetson hard hat here, right? This is what it looks like. And what it has in it that makes it so special and why I love it from a heat illness standpoint or any emergency medical standpoint is I left a sticker on this one so I can show you guys, is this hard hat has the ability for me to pick up my phone, tap the back of the hard hat. This is registered to one employee, and it gives me all the medical information on that employee. I can load any SDS that is relevant to the site, to this hard hat, and I can load and log any safety documents that are pertinent to the site. So whether you're in construction or manufacturing or wherever, if you have employees who are in high heat situations, they have high exposure, or there's a potential where someone has any form of personal medical or anything of that nature, I mean, this hard hat can give that employee access to any SDS, any safety document, and first responders can have immediate access to all of their medical records in real time. All they have to do is tap their phone to the back of the hard hat and it gives you everything that you need. So when we're looking at whether it be heat illness or any form of other aspect, the one thing I like to look at, like I said, is something that can, my team needs to wear hard hats. So is there anything else that a hard hat can provide me or my team that is going to be beneficial to them or emergency personnel or the other colleagues around them, right? So if I'm wearing a hard hat, I had this happen at one of my facilities where an associate was wearing a hard hat. Another associate kind of seen that he was acting a little funny, went up, bang, tapped his hard hat, pulled up, and in that medical, right, it shows that this employee at times has the issue of low blood sugar, right? So now let's mitigate that potential injury. Let's mitigate that, fallout. And hey, I seen that you have, low blood sugar. So what I'd like to do is take you to the break room, et cetera, et cetera. So, the Stetson hard hat's great. There's a lot of ability there to store data. There's a lot of ability there to help first responders. Like when Jennifer mentioned earlier, that 20-minute, like seconds count, the ability to get that medical data, get any association of data sheets or safety documents to emergency responders quickly is fantastic. So it's something I would look at if I were you guys in manufacturing. And everything I present here, my information will be at the end of the slides. If you ever have questions or, you want real data or stories, or we do trials and everything, I'm happy to share anything. I do not believe that anything in safety is proprietary. Anything that I do at my companies or consulting wise, I'm always happy to share data. I'm always happy to have conversations. The more conversations, the more open I believe that we can be about what we're doing that's effective, the more it's going to help other people. So one of the things, like I mentioned, and that is PPE for manufacturing. So whether it's a full body arc flash suit, as you see, a Tyvek suit, or a molten metal suit, as you see, one thing we have to look at is, should they have special considerations? Absolutely, right? Is it like, when is it necessary, when is it not? I've went into manufacturing facilities that says you have to wear a Tyvek suit all day every day. I said, okay, why? It's just easier than deciding when they do and when they don't. Okay, well, if you're an electrician, you have to wear arc flash suit for all levels of arc flash regardless. Why? Well, it's just easier than building a policy that says for level 2 wear this, for level 3 wear that, level 4 wear that. So, you know, when we look in doing our due diligence and we're completing our JSAs, we're identifying that there's arc flash hazards, we're identifying levels. Really, let's do our due diligence to make sure that we are being effective and having people wear PPE. And it's not just a time that we're saying wear it because that's the easiest thing for us to do. I see that a lot with hearing protection, just as an example, is instead of identifying exposure groups and going through facilities and identifying where hearing protection could be required, they say, hey, everyone in the company is just going to wear hearing protection. It's the easiest thing to do. Whenever we do that with PPE, when we do, especially we do that with heavy PPE and things that are full body exposure, we really hurt our chances to mitigate, injuries and illnesses, and really we are setting our employees up to have problems. So one thing I ask here is, what if they're wearing respirators, right? So one thing that our team wears is if they're in a full Tyvek suit or something of that nature, and they're also wearing, a full face respirator. Now you're taking their O2 levels and you're dropping them. Now you're taking the respiratory count and dropping them, or it's increasing them potentially. And when we're doing our assessments of what PPEs require in our heat exposure, we really need to make sure that we're including that. Like I said earlier, when we have a heat illness prevention plan that is all encompassing, we're not doing our due diligence to help certain exposure groups. So make sure that you build your plan. You're taking each one of these exposure groups, you're taking what they have to wear, when they have to wear it, how they have to wear it, for how long they have to wear it, and you're putting that into plan. There's a high probability that they may need more breaks. There's a high probability that they may need to be able to get out of their suit and then get back into it. One thing I always try to tell people is also how we address things, right? If I have somebody in a full arc flash suit and our production line is down and it's 110 degrees outside, and I go up to them and I say, hey, listen, this plant doesn't operate till you get this fixed. I need you to get it fixed as soon as possible. You're not leaving this job till it gets done. There's a high probability that employee is probably going to put themselves in a very risky position, and they're going to have, a greater level of exposure than what they need to have, instead of, hey, listen, I understand this job's going to take a while. The suit you're wearing is hot. You're going to have to, it's going to take a long time. So take breaks as needed. Let me know if you need anything. I'm going to come by every now and then to check on you. And just doing some due diligence there and understanding the guys that are wearing these suits, or gals that are wearing these suits, or the additional PPE, they're really at a different exposure group, and I see it missed all the time. So like I said, so one of the things, so as far as companies go, and I'm not a rep of any of these companies, by the way. I just want to give you guys some data of stuff that we've used, and when we trial them at the level that I've trialed them and at the amount of employees that we've trialed them, I feel like it's good data, so I always try to share it. So when we're looking at what is correct PPE versus what's adding problems and protection, gloves are typically a big miss in manufacturing, where I see they just kind of have one set glove and that's what you use all year round. And the reality is that, if I'm wearing a glove that really should be rated for winter, and I'm sweating through my gloves and I'm losing sodium and things like that, it's amazing how little things like that can lead to further heat illnesses. It can lead to problems. So, Hexfarmer is a great company I've used. They actually have summer gloves and winter gloves, different gauges, different ratings, and that really allows us to dive in and put what's needed in front of the employee, not just what's easiest. So, like I said, when you're doing your PPE assessments, you're doing your JSAs, you're doing things like that, make sure that when it comes summertime for heat illness, that we aren't just mandating all the PPE because it's the easiest thing to do, and we're just throwing base level PPE at everybody. Make sure that we're diving into what's needed. Is there a need to change? It could be the same companies, but is there a need to change for summertime or for certain exposure groups, summer versus winter and things like that? Hexanorm is great because they'll allow you to do trials. You can dive in and they'll bring you, I mean, they brought me thousands of gloves at no cost to the employer to really dive in and check stuff out. So it's something that if you haven't done, look into, what supplier you guys have. Are we using the appropriate PPE? Are there differences? Are there things that we can bring in for the summertime that doesn't necessarily cost us any additional money? Or if it does cost us an additional money, it's something that we can prove ROI on, in a short period of time. Any questions about PPE or wearables or anything, or PPE or hard hats, gloves, suits, anything like that? This conversation could be at a substantial depth. But really the key there is that we're doing our due diligence and we're actually identifying what's needed for a job. We're not just throwing people in suits because we believe that's the easiest thing to do. And we're updating our PPE assessments and our job safety analysis to include heat illness in what we're wearing, which could absolutely allow employees or require employees to take more breaks or to take the suits off at a more regular interval during the summertime. Any questions? Okay. So next thing is essential wearables. Again, these are things that I have experience with, so that's why I like to talk about them. So one of the things is MakuSafe has a very comprehensive solution for proactive heat illness and injury. This is something I'll kind of show you here with the photo on the right. It's just something that an employee wears on their right or left arm. And it has an ability to track both ambient temperatures, core body temperatures, radiant machine temperatures. It'll track it through the entire day so that you can collect data trends and understand where there could be potential for higher exposure limits. The great thing about this device that also, again, in my mind, I don't want to solve one problem. I want to try to solve as many as possible, is it also does track slip and falls. It also tracks repetitive motion, anything that's done that could lead to an injury in general. But this specific device does have heat indexing and monitoring built into it for individual workers, so that you can track things on a total preventative measure. I rolled these out at a facility that was actually in New Mexico. They had somewhere between 10 and 15 heat illness related incidences at this one manufacturing plant. We rolled these out. They've been at zero ever since we've rolled these out. And again, it is something that a business pitch is going to have to be made. But the reality is that they were able to get to zero because of the data that it tracks. It also will auto alert your supervisors or your leads. If you have any potential where someone's body temperature does raise, it'll automatically notify, hey, Cameron Johnson's body temperature is now 98 degrees. So it gives you an opportunity to get in front of stuff and get people to take the breaks they need. If it identifies, that there are any other issues, like if there's a machine that's radiating more heat than normal, it'll alert you and say, hey, so-and-so has been exposed to a higher level of heat than they are typically exposed to based on the data trend that it collects. But again, it does track a lot of things. If you look it up, it tracks repetitive motion, it tracks slip and falls. It'll even track everything from forklift to pedestrian interaction to in the sensor system on it. It'll notify an operator, or it'll notify you of a near miss or a close call based on forklift pedestrian interaction. There's a lot of things that this can do, but this is one device that I've been able to have some pretty substantial success with as far as heat illness goes. It's one of the only devices that I've been able to find. I'm sure there's more out there, but it's one of the only one I've been able to find that's really end user friendly and actually data tracks on a very routine basis throughout the day to collect data trends. Data trends, in my mind, are one of the greatest assets that we can have to presenting to senior leaders as far as, things that we want to do to solve it. It's really tough to present problems whenever it's just word of mouth or, hey, we have a singular incident that we can prove. But if we have data trends, and I can take them and say, hey, over the last 30 days, we've had 15 employees who have higher exposure limits than they need to. It makes our argument a little easier to justify. So cold vest. So cold vest is one of those things that I mentioned. Yeah. So actually, Tom, it does have lone worker capabilities. And actually, I can send, this is a company I work with pretty regularly, so happy to send any information to anybody on this, but it does actually have a lone worker program in it. So I'm really glad you mentioned that. Apologies on skipping over that. It actually even has two-way communication built into it. So if you're not a huge team and you're a team of, you're a contractor or you're somebody in a small manufacturing that you have people in lone working situations or even maybe confined working situations, this device, they can press it and it'll act as a radio, and it also saves the communication. So if they're communicating to you about the conditions they're in, or vice versa, you're communicating to them, you can download that conversation. But it is fantastic. It'll also geolocate. So if you have a lone worker who is working, in I don't know, the middle of nowhere, and because it's satellite based, it will track them. So if they're supposed to be in an area and as a supervisor you decide to look something up and something doesn't look right, bam, I need to go check on them, or you can geolocate them. So there's a lot of functions there, but from a heat illness and preventative side, it'll absolutely do lone worker. It actually has a lone worker setting that allows two-way communication. So it tracks heat, it tracks everything you need to track, confined space, it'll track, like I said, slip and falls and all of these other metrics. But it does have a singular lone worker setting as well. And Christy, yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I'm going to put my information on the very last slide. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. Feel free to email me. Like I said, I don't believe anything of what I do over the last decade is proprietary. Anything that I can get to your guys' hands for you guys to use, even if it's just information, happy to do so. But this is great, and if you have the ability to make the financial argument to be proactive, most companies that roll this out see between a 60% and 80% decrease in heat-related illnesses after rollout, and honestly, some see up to 100% depending on the totality of how much you use this and how much you dive into the data trains. Yeah. So, and Brandon just mentioned this as well. So there is Slate Safety has a session on this Heat Summit as well that goes into wearables and lone worker wearables. Highly recommend checking them out as well. From my understanding, they're fantastic. So if you're interested in wearables, you're interested in how that can be proactive. There is a session by Slate Safety that will go over that stuff as well. But happy to share anything, but definitely check out Slate Safety. All right. So cold vest. There's also a session on cold vest, which makes me laugh. But so cold vest is amazing. There's no ice, no refrigeration. It's less than 10 pounds, and it's in a bag. So it makes it really easy to deploy. You can store it anywhere. And it, like I said before, it can change up to 10 degrees in your total your core body temperature within 30 minutes. So when you look at the difference between a heat stroke and heat exhaustion, right? Heat stroke being, say, 103-degree core body temperature and above, heat exhaustion, it's 100 and some change. And then obviously, you're starting your heat illness at around 98.6 degrees. So if you can identify that somebody really needing their core body temperature cooled down, and you can get this device in front of them or on them, you have the ability to go from a heat stroke down all the way down, and the ability, even if they're at 103, 104 degree core body temperature, get them down into, the low 90s very quickly. So it is something that we use. It's something I've used in my emergency pack outs when we do wilderness stuff, or we do lone worker training and things like that. I have people all the time comment after we've rolled these out to companies or to manufacturing clients who are like, man, I never thought I would use it. Last summer, we had this random incident. We pulled it out, and they go out for emergency medical and they're okay. Very minor long-term issues or no long-term issues. So from an emergency pack out standpoint and adding to your emergency kits on site, in my mind, this is an absolute no-brainer. It's something that you should look into. They're not, as far as the overall aspect of how much a compensatory workers' comp claim is, but honestly, just the value of someone's life and health. They're about $550. They're absolutely worth it. Even if you just have one on your site that can be rolled out when needed, it can be absolutely life-saving. All right. Any questions about some of the tech we went over? Like I said, those are some items that I use personally. The hard helmets that have the ability to pull medical records or pull medical data and have SDS storage and things like that. Some of the wearables that allow to track heat illness and heat conditions, as well as, lone worker as mentioned. and some of those preventative measures, as well as cold vest, which is a emergency measure. Any questions about any of that? All right. So the thing that most people love on the studs. Oh, Daniel, what you got? Yeah. So on the Stunts and Hearts hat, what was the response from employees potentially disclosing medical information via the NFC? So essentially, what we did is we rolled it out as a voluntary aspect first, and we let everybody know as that employee will actually sign up when they get the hard hat. They will scan the little QR code that is on the back of this, and they will sign up so they can put as much information as they want in there as they feel comfortable with. And what I've seen from the beginning to the end of a transitional rollout, especially if you ever have an incident that's safety related, I know we're talking about illness today, but even if it's safety related, what we've seen is in the very beginning, employees did put kind of as little information on there as possible. But as time went, or as incidences went, it's amazing how many employees decided to, hey, Cameron, can I go on the portal and update my information? So then we send them a link and they update it. I would say for the most part, 80 to 90% of employees, and I'm talking about thousands, 80 to 90 employee or percent of the employees love it. They think it's fantastic. They really want to dive into it more. You're always going to have a few employees who have that, well, I don't want to disclose this, or I have ADA accommodations and things like that. I would say tread those waters carefully, but we always roll it out in every company that I've tried to assist over the years in a voluntary, put as much information as you feel comfortable. And typically you'd be surprised over time how much information someone's willing to share if they know at some point they could save their life. So that answer your question, Daniel? Awesome. Yeah. So the funnest topic. So this is really a big thing that I do as I travel through the U.S. now over the last like 7 years. Is I get to go meet with C-level execs or other leadership, and I get to make arguments about why EHS does not have a seat at the table, or how do we get EHS a budget. So I kind of want to briefly go over, especially with heat illness, right, the ability to obtain some of these items and how I typically make a pitch to leadership. So I was very curious if I should share this data with you, but I decided to go ahead and share it to you guys. So from 2022 to 2025, I went to around 113 job sites to meet with executives. And typically, like what I asked is that why EHS does not have a seat at the table? Why does EHS not have a budget? And then what can EHS do to have a seat at the table and have a budget, right? We have $1 million worth of things we want, and you want to give me $1. So how do I get more? So shockingly, about 73 job sites, around 65% of the sites answered in some variation of EHS does not show up to senior meetings prepared, and they tend to pitch projects prematurely. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because that's something we can work on. And then, but one thing is a very similar answer is EHS is always pushing for something different. Every day is a huge problem. Even if we wanted to dedicate time and resources to the issue, it changes daily and weekly. And I would say that's probably pretty true. I know it's been pretty true for me through the years of, we have a big issue happen. I'm like, hey, we need to solve this. Give me money to solve this. And then another fire happens down the road. Hey, give me this. I need to solve this. So really one of the best things to mitigate this, to really focus on EHS being able to obtain budgets, be able to have a seat at the table, and how we can integrate our overall EHS strategic plan in the totality of business initiatives is to build a strategic plan as well as create strategic direction. But one of those is to build a strategic plan, right? So this is kind of an example. This is not a complex strategic plan. I just wanted to give you guys an example. Q4 is not on there just for space purposes, but something that outlines the ability so that senior leaders or management understands, here are the projects that I'm working on for the year. Some of you guys may already have strategic plans. Some of you may not. Some strategic plans can get very in-depth. One of the strategic plans that I have for actually just one of my buildings is like 14 pages, but it doesn't have to be complex. And really what a strategic plan looks like for me is we're going to lay out what we're going to work on for Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. And I typically pick 2 projects. And those 2 projects are what I'm going to show to senior leaders so that I can get funding. So for heat illness purposes, Q2 is my goal is to work on a heat illness prevention plan, program, policy, procedure. So we'll break that down into a few projects, right? I want to develop a up-to-date heat illness prevention plan. I want to initiate temperature and humidity monitoring. If you haven't done it, I highly suggest it. You'll be surprised about what the temperatures are in various locations in your building. And then I want to procure the heat illness prevention items such as squinchers or tailwind, coolers, etc. So that gives them a clear guideline from the beginning of the year that says, okay, as we approach Q2, here are some things EHS is going to ask from us. We're always going to have the last minute things that we're going to need, or the random fires that we're always putting out, because I don't know about you all, but there's typically at least a few fires a day for me. But this gives a clear overview so that there's something that's easily trackable by leadership, that they know if I invest resources into this, there's a clear plan laid out. It's not just hey, this happened, give me money. Okay, exactly where is all that money going? How are your projects laid out? What is your expectations? What are timelines? All of that stuff. This gives it to them. Here's the timeline. We're going on Q2 in April. We're going to start heat illness prevention. By the end of June, we'll have everything rolled out. So my goal is to get everything I need by the end of June so that I have everything pushed out. And that may vary for you guys, right? Depending on where you're at in the United States, you may need to adjust those timelines so that you have all the material you need prior to you pushing out a heat illness plan. So I always tell everybody, and I have a lot of success with this whenever I go and meet with senior leaders, is I always pitch 3 options, okay? One option is essentially everything and the Holy Grail. Give me everything. Give me everything humanly possible that I want for this project. Option 2 is essentially give me everything that I really want, for the most part, right? I may not have all the high-end stuff, but it solves the problem and then some. And then option 3 is it kind of solves the problem, but it doesn't necessarily make sense to go with it. And really what you're looking for is to get option 2, right? So option 2 and 3 are going to be very close together in price. So it just doesn't make sense not to just go ahead and go with option 2. And I'll show you what I mean. So if I'm going to build out, I guess we'll back up one second. So when we're going to build out this pitch, some of the things we're looking at is what is our current employee acquisition cost? What does it currently cost me to bring on a new hire, right? What is it from day 1 to day 90, right? What does that cost for that acquisition? What are your current direct labor costs, right? So if an employee who is an extrusion operator has something, what is that direct labor cost, so that I can show what that potential loss could be. And then what are our current hourly downtime for employee downtime costs? So if I lose productivity because a couple people go down, what is our current productivity cost? And typically you can break those number down in a lot of ways, but those are some of the ways that I look at those as far as direct labors and employee downtime, and then acquisition. Those are the big 3 that typically hit pretty hard when people are looking at them. We can look at our current EHS KPIs and trends. So for any form of compensatory workers' comp trend or cost, do we have historic heat illness issues? And if we do, we need to make sure that we put that data in there. If you have the ability to pull workers' comp data, so you know what your premiums cost, you know what your what's currently budgeted for your work comp versus what the expense is, we want that data. We want to know what, from an ROI position, is it going to be a cost savings or a cost avoidance? And what I see all the time, EHS professionals are saying, hey, I need $10,000 for this project. It's going to save us, a lot of money because we're not going to get audited by OSHA. Or if we get audited by OSHA, it is OSHA, so we're going to save that. So that's a cost avoidance, right? So cost savings will come from, we currently spend $10,000 on this project. I think that I can get all of this items for $8,000. We have cost savings of $2,000. We have a cost avoidance if I spend this money and we avoid something happening. So there's some nuances there that when I talk to executives, they point those out pretty consistently. So one of the things that I look at as far as direct costs as far as savings perspective is direct costs versus indirect costs, right? So most people understand there's going to be direct cost influence based on mitigating insurance premiums, lowering trend data, and lowering compensatory workers' comp claims. Indirect costs, right? We're going to reduce productivity loss, absenteeism, turnover, things like that. But I want to say a big one, and this is a big one that I see a lot of positive from leaders, is one thing that will absolutely help is if we bring this, doesn't matter what the project is, if we bring this project on, it is going to help the company reputation. And honestly, it's going to help us gain market share for job seekers. Every company is looking for higher qualified people. And if we bring this heat illness plan on, and we bring Squinchers popsicles, and we bring coolers, and we bring towels, and we bring all these things, and these employees are going to realize that we're giving back to them. They're going to go into the community, they're going to talk about it, and that's going to increase our market share for job seekers. That's a big one that I always love to share. So we could break this down, right? So here's an example of a heat illness that I might pitch that it's give me everything and then some, right? I want Squincher popsicles. I need 9,000 of them. And really what that is we identified from a Squincher powder and a Squincher popsicle is I'm going to use Squincher popsicles any day that it gets over 90 degrees. And on average in the US, depending where you live, about 30 days will get over 90 degrees. And if you live, in the desert, that probably changes, right? But for example purposes, for 30 days, I want popsicle quantity for all employees for 30 days. Squincher popsicle is anything, or a Squincher powder is anything over 80 degrees. That helps in our heat illness plan. So we're going to get water coolers, we're going to get cooling towels, we're going to get cold vests, we're going to get first aid kits, Stetson hard hats, we're going to get wearables, right? So we're going to break that down to about $255 per employee. And so this is give me everything. I want everything. And a lot of companies will look at this and say, you are absolutely crazy. That's not going to happen. And I don't blame them. Those last two options are strategic initiatives that really should be built out over a year or two, not necessarily just dove into day one. But that's the purpose of this first option. The purpose of this first option is it gives them something so high, they're like, absolutely no chance. Like, great, I have two more solutions that can solve this. One of the solutions is the Squincher popsicles, powders, coolers, towels, vests, and it's not going to include the two big techs. And that's going to go from a $255 per employee cost to a $22 per employee cost. So I can go to this company now and say, hey, listen, our current employee acquisition cost is $1,200. So if I make that $1,225, is that going to change much for us? Probably not, right? So $22 per employee, and I have stock for the entire summer to give out popsicles, to give out powder, to give out cooling towels, to give out, and then I have emergency equipment as far as cold vests and first aid kits. So that's option two, right? This is the one we want. And if you look at the difference between option two and option three, is option three is $12 per employee, right? But it really doesn't solve what we want. It kind of gives us some powder. We get some water coolers, we get some towels, and we get one vest. We don't get anything else. We don't get anything that's nice to have. And the argument here is, well, if this is an option, well, can we just spend $10 more per employee and get what we want? And I'll tell you, 8 times out of 10, we will land on this second option. They will see $255, they will see $22, and they will see $12. And the goal there, right, is that the bottom two options are close enough together that it makes more sense just to do the middle option, right? That solves all of our problems, and we get some stuff we'd like to have instead of just bare basics. So what we look at here is pretty simple, right? We can look at our associated costs. We can go into employee acquisitions. We can go into downtime. We can go into potential regulatory stuff. We can dive into that, but that's not really exactly what's going to sell most senior leaders. Us assuming that there could or could not be ambulance visits, or there could or could not be regulatory stuff. Most of the time, of the executives that I've worked with, that's not something immediately on their mind, right? They want to know what direct costs and indirect costs are going to be, and they want to know whether or not there's going to be a cost avoidance or a cost savings, and at the end of the day, what their ROI is going to be. So the pitch here is pretty simple, right? So if we lose an employee because of an employee absenteeism, my English today is brutal. If we lose an employee due to heat-related illness, right, or avoiding the heat. I mean, I'm sure plenty of you know people who are like, okay, it's going to be 110 degrees today. I am not going to work, right? So if we lose someone because of an illness or just avoiding the heat for this company is 300 people. it's going to be about $1,840 per day for that employee to be out of work. That's the downtime we lost because that employee is a pivotal person for us and they add value added work every day. And that's the difference, right? We're going to pitch based on value added work. So over the course of a week, we would potentially lose about $9,200 if they're out. And if we have to rehire someone, right, our employee acquisition cost is $1,200. So realistically, for an employee to be out 1 week and us have to bring a new employee on, right, we could be looking at $9,000, $10,000 a week based on productivity downtime loss. So fortunately, there's a cost-effective solution, right? My goal is I want to invest $22 per employee. Just $22, right? And this is going to cover the entire summer. This isn't $22 per week. This isn't $22 per month. This is $22 for the entire summer. And we will implement this as a multidisciplinary initiative. I don't want to take full credit, right? I want to get HR involved. And I'll tell the leadership that. The reality is I want HR involved, and I want them to hand out popsicles, and I want them to be involved in cooling towels, and I want them to be able to show from a HR perspective that they care about our employees. And this is all going to let leadership know that we're not trying to say, hoop, hoop, hurrah, look at me, I'm amazing. Our goal is to bring as many initiatives out and multidisciplinary as possible. In manufacturing, a lot of the stuff that I bring out is I get my vice president of engineering together. I get my vice president of maintenance and facilities together, and I roll out programs that I want that benefits me in safety or EHS. And really, though, we roll it out as a multidisciplinary approach because it shows that collaboration, it shows that approach. So that's my goal here with Heat Illness is I want to get HR involved, so that we can push that out. And really that's what it looks like, right? Is it looks like, okay, so we really could lose $1,840 a day, $9,000 a week. And the reality is the solution is $22 per employee. I'm not a big proponent to throw out, hey, this is going to be a $7,000 solution. Those numbers will come out. But as far as initial pitches, as far as the ability to communicate the conversation, and as far as the ability to engage in conversation, is I'm going to pitch it per employee. The number is obviously substantially lower. And a lot of the times for senior leaders, it makes it easier to digest. They're not saying, dang, I got to cut a check for $7,000. You can go to them and say, hey, listen, so our employees matter to us, right? Great. Are you willing to invest $22 per employee? And there's a strategic way to do this. And obviously, when I go to companies, this is what I do a lot. Is I take the plans that they're wanting and I build them out and I pitch them for EHS professionals through the U.S. But and it takes days and days and days of data collection and a half of an afternoon to make the pitch effective. But this is something I want you guys to look at. This is something that I really think you guys should look at, is when you're making your pitches of things that you want, whether it's heat related stuff and you want this green box of items, right? So this is pitched out for 300 people. So if you have approximately 300 people or less, use this pitch. But pitch three things. Pitch one that is an astronomical number that realistically you're probably never going to get. Pitch one that gives you everything that you need and realistically looks decent on paper. And then pitch one that's pretty close to what you want, but really just doesn't solve your problems. And it won't make sense for senior leaders to buy for that because it doesn't solve their problems either. And you can tell them that, right? Option one solves all of our problems. It's also proactive in the future. Option two solves all of our problems and realistically a little more. And option three doesn't really solve our problems, but it does kind of help us a little bit. I have yet to have a company go for none of the options at the end of the day. But most of the time, like I said, probably 75, 80%, they land on the middle option just because it makes sense. And it doesn't matter if you have a budget, doesn't matter if you have, regardless, the big deal is how can you put the data together to not necessarily show an ROI. At times, it's really hard in safety to show what that return on investment is, but you can show a cost savings versus cost avoidance, and you can show them what the potentials are if we don't do the program, and just make it seem like if they say no, it would be a dumb choice. And the example there is I pitched a glove trial for Kalis Manufacturing, in which we increased quality and we went from a $4 glove to a $32 pair of gloves. And the expectation was exactly that. And at the end, our COO sat at the table and he looked me dead in the face and he goes, Cameron, I guess it would be pretty dumb if we don't do this. Yes, you are correct. I like the way you think. So make sure that we're pitching multiple options. It's really easy to say no to one. it's hard to say no when you have multiple solutions, multiple options that make sense. So kind of some key takeaways for me, and then I'll do some open for question and answer here is, really, heat illness is super vital, right? It starts at 98.6 degrees. It's not something that you have to have a super high body temperature before it actually starts affecting employees. Make sure that we're drinking water, we're drinking electrolytes, we're avoiding alcohol and caffeine. We're not just slamming 4 or 5 Red Bulls a day. Make sure that we're maintaining, and manufacturing is huge. Make sure that we're maintaining personal protective equipment assessments. We're not just putting people in PPE because we think it's the easiest route, and that we're doing job safety analysis that include heat illness in the JSA based on the exposure group that they are in. Recognize the potential for radiant heat from machinery, and honestly, it's a significant impact for specific exposure groups. Regular do temperature checks throughout the totality of facilities. Don't just dive in to, I'm going to put one thermometer at the supervisor office in the middle of the facility. There's a high probability that it is extremely inaccurate and you are putting certain exposure groups at risk. And leverage technology, whether it be hard hats, whether it be PPE, whether it be emergency equipment, really start there's so much technology that's out there, and I look forward to checking out Slate Safety's wearables as well, because it's something that I don't think that I'll ever say no. Like, there's things changing so quickly. Dive into what potential technology could be. And then build strategic plans, right? It's really easy for EHS to jump from one fire to another fire to another fire. And you're still going to have to do that for the most part. But from a resource allocation standpoint, if you have a strategic plan over the course of a year, I like to break them out quarterly because you can also change them quarterly if needed. It's easier for senior leaders to say, okay, so for the next few months, you're going to dive into these 2 problems. So if we do need to provide resources, it'll be these 2 problems. And then you're not just constantly jumping around. Again, that was one of the big things that senior leaders, when I meet with, complain about is even if I wanted to invest resources, the problem changes every week, right? So build out a strategic plan. And then as far as when you're making pitches, right, make 3, right? Give them 3 options, a high, medium, and low. Really shoot for the medium option. And the reality is we'll be happy if we get any of them. But it's better than pitching one option that gets turned down. Go prepared to meetings. If you're ready to pitch something and you're ready to give them the data, if you're ready to pitch something and you really are looking for a resource allocation, be ready for questions. Come prepared with the data, right? That's another point that senior leaders make is EHS doesn't come prepared to meetings. And that's not everybody, right? But collectively, for me to get that feedback, come prepared. Come prepared with data, come prepared with spreadsheets, come prepared, get everything you can together. It's better to wait a month and present something with all of the data than to present it too early that you can't defend. It gets turned down. It's really hard to come back. All right. So resources, right? So these are, I know these slides or this recording will go out to everybody. So some of the stuff that I use and some of the websites, as far as the link that you guys wanted on the wearables or the Stetson hard hats, the Hex Armor, some of the guidelines and expectations around NIOSH and OSHA for heat standards. And remember, right, this is an OSHA quote. For every $1 invested in workplace safety program, businesses see a return of $4 to $6. And the ability to expound on what that return is a critical skill that I highly suggest everybody to dive into. EHS does not have to be a cost center. You can absolutely get money back. If you're in a captive or if you can dive into your workers' compensation, you really can. And I'll say this as an example. Last year, we dove into a lot of initiatives and our insurance gave us back $300,000. All right, so now we can use that to then really start focusing on the ability to progress and have continuous improvement because we were able to work with our insurance company on a regular basis and understand how us changing benefits them, and then how we can work on mitigating insurance premiums. And if you're in a captive or something like that, you have the ability to get funds back, especially for safety initiatives. So, all right. So there's my information. Happy to add me on LinkedIn. That's my my go-to email for the time being. add me. If you have questions or anything, shoot them in the chat. This is a perfect time to do so. And then obviously, if you go home, you think about it and you're like, I'd like to know more information about any of this stuff. Or maybe, my key thing is I love working on strategic plans and, getting people budgets and understanding how we can build strategic initiatives and integrate it into overall business strategies. Shoot me a message. That's what I do. I'm not a regulator. I'm not going to sit here and be able to quote OSHA off the top of my head every second of every day and understand what OSHA 1910.168C says. But as far as EHS and the ability to integrate EHS in business and get funding, that's what I do. I help EHS professionals get budgets and get a strategic voice in the company. So do not be afraid to reach out. So I'll open it up for any questions or anything like that.
All right, not seeing any questions coming through, but incredible job, Cameron. We're absolutely happy that you made time to speak at our session today. Again, this will be recorded and posted for everybody that registered. Thanks for everyone who attended, and those who couldn't make it. You'll see this in your email shortly.